Mark, let's do the news.
Okay, so the first story of the day from Fandroid, P-H-A-N-D-R-O-I-D, Fandroid, that's spelled that way. Android market is now in 46 countries. So according to the App Store Analytics Group Distimo, which has a little octopus logo, I think, that's what I'm thinking of. The Android market has found its way into 46 countries, which is 25 more than just a few weeks ago. So I remember we were talking about this, a couple weeks ago, actually.
Huge.
This is a huge jump. I mean, I was like, really? Is that right? So among the new countries, Brazil, well, that should be huge for them, I would think, right? Mm-hmm. Thailand, Israel. The number of countries with access to paid apps has grown to 13. So Australia has joined. So I guess it wasn't just Canada that didn't have paid apps. It seems to be a problem in several countries.
It takes a long time to get international paid app markets, like from what I've seen.
Why is that? I just don't understand that.
It's puzzling.
I'm not sure. You know, maybe we should bring in somebody.
Why
who
is that
will,
hard?
talk
I mean,
about
like,
that.
really?
Do you have any idea why that would be? Like, just out of curiosity, just.
But I think that once you're talking about, I think there's legal issues involved.
Well, no, there are, but I just don't understand why other countries, why there's so many legal hurdles involved with buying virtual goods, I guess,
I don't think that it's necessarily that there's any impossible hurdles, but maybe it just takes a lot of effort, and it's a question of how many different countries you want to work on at a time.
Is it because it's on a phone as opposed to on a desktop, do you think? You think it's because the carriers are involved and there's regulations and stuff like that? That would be my guess. If I had to guess.
Taxes might be a big obstacle.
No, but taxes are, I don't know. I mean, for online stuff, I think we're past the tax stuff, I would think.
Yeah.
But I think it's because telcos are involved. That's
It's got to be, because
guessing.
you can download something from any country you want.
Yeah.
I think the telco, I think that's
There's
probably
regulation
the big,
that they have to, like,
the regulations,
untangle.
and like even in, I mean, the one thing that we talked about last week was in the Android market in South Korea, they took away all the games.
Right.
Because they weren't being approved. They have to each individually be approved, and so Google decided then we'll just pull games from the South Korean Android market because it was just easier.
Yeah.
And that way they wouldn't get in trouble. And so I think that in terms of that, like, different countries have different regulations also for telco, but, not only for telco, but for other things. So they might just say, well, no R-rated apps, no X-rated apps, whatever. And so that also takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I know Australia has a bunch of regulations on software, so.
Okay.
Like,
So
They're trying to add a lot more.
Yeah.
Really?
It's pretty ugly.
There's been a lot of news about Australian internet filtering, but I think it's still sort of a hot debate area down there. It's people who want to regulate content on the internet more than is really possible or is just the norm anywhere else. But we'll have to see what happens there. I'm sure that would slow things down.
To keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
I did not know that, so thanks.
Yeah.
I'm like, now I want to.
Mainly with games, but they're also doing internet censor, or talking about internet censor. Yeah, it's not pretty.
Yeah.
Okay. Next story. 38,000 apps in the market. Nexus One is bringing in profits.
Yeah,
so Nexus One is
we were
actually
talking about the. They did say they were it is
because
profitable.
Google, they had their earnings call, I think, yesterday or today. It must have been yesterday. So Google's earnings are up for this year. What a surprise!
They're doing very well.
5.06 billion this past quarter.
Quarter. I love it.
The 19% increase. This was a 19% increase over last year, with Android being a significant part of it. I'm trying to see here how significant.
I love this part of this news article that says that basically from last September to now, the Android market has grown 28,000 apps.
That's insane.
Since last September, which is they had 10,000 then, and now they have.
Yeah, there's very little doubt that marketplace is every bit as vibrant as Apple's.
Yeah,
even though the number of apps are lower, it's catching up very fast.
Well, but I mean,
because people started writing farting apps for.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's true.
It doesn't really mean I don't think it necessarily means much about quality.
Yeah.
I mean, back when they're under 10,000, there were some amazing apps, and I mean, there are more and more good apps all the time. I think there are more sort of uniquely amazing apps probably still for the iPhone, but it's hard to name a category where there aren't like outstanding apps for any area of productivity or gaming or something like that. There are good apps.
Have you programmed for both devices?
I've done Mac development. I haven't done iPhone development.
Okay, but you play around with Cocoa, I imagine.
Yeah.
Objective-C. So, would you get, based on what you know, is it easier on one platform versus the other, or what would you think?
No, I don't. I think for some people it might be. It depends a lot on what you're trying to write. I mean, Cocoa's a great API. Android's a great API. I think they both have strengths and weaknesses. I'm the kind of developer where the language and the environment, they're just tools, and if they make it possible, then I'll get it done, and it doesn't necessarily
matter.
matter.
Feel one is better than the other.
No, I don't think inherently. I do think that they both have some significant weaknesses, and I hope they both improve. But they're very different.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But in terms of, I mean, I think most productivity and sort of interesting apps, like, if you want like a really good Twitter client or something like that, I mean, both APIs are equally good for creating something like that. It's just a question of resources because they are completely different. You can't share any code in common. That's the main thing. But
you can't develop for both platforms easily.
No, and Apple just made it even harder. Some people were trying to bridge the gap. Doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. But honestly, they're both great platforms, and so if you get someone who learns to do Android development, someone who learns to do iPhone development, or even someone who learns to do both, it's not like there's any inherent difficult challenge to any one particular one. But then I think there are other apps that really sort of push one particular platform to the limits. There are things you can only do on an iPhone currently. There are things you can only do on Android currently. And I think those are particularly interesting, really sort of pushing things in new directions. And both platforms have lots of really cool things like that.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool.
The other bit of this news article was that the Nexus 1 is actually turning a profit. There was some debate over the business plan of selling an unsubsidized phone through the website, and it appears that Google was right, after all.
Yeah.
So,
I think, like you were saying, it was a small amount, but I think in terms of when you're selling it unsubsidized, you're not dealing with carriers who are taking cuts of what you're making off the phone, who want to do rebates and all this other stuff. I mean, I think obviously you can make it, you don't have to sell nearly as many to make it a profitable business venture.
Well, just to be clear, Apple is selling the Nexus 1 with the carrier rebate if you want. I don't know the breakdown. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
I think that really one of the key markets for that. I could be wrong. I think it's really key for developers, because for developers, you might have one phone, but I mean you're locked into your 2-year contract just like everyone else.
Yep.
Right.
Maybe 1 year on Sprint, but if you're a developer, you have the budget if you're going to be making money on it, and you don't want to be locked into a contract, but you want a phone that works.
Just buy it
you want it unlocked. You want to be
Done.
able to swap SIM cards. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think that's probably the most concise and applicable explanation as to like why a lot of people would go with an unlocked phone. Like for development, I think that makes the most sense.
That's perfect sense there. I think that there's also probably a lot of other people who want an unlocked phone, but it's still really hard, I think, in the U.S. you can't just try walking into an AT&T store and say, I just want a plan, I don't want a phone.
right. Yeah,
now, they
won't understand what you're saying.
You can do this in Europe, you can do it in Mexico, you can do it in Asia. I mean, almost anywhere else, you can just walk in and they'll hand you a SIM card. But you can't do that here. T-Mobile is the closest right now, but it's not exactly that easy. But I mean, they'll actually charge you less if you don't want a phone, if you already have a phone. But I don't know how easy that is in most stores. I'll bet most salespeople still look at you funny.
Crying.
Like, what?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're talking to me about. You don't want a phone. You just want a plan. I need to go get my manager.
I think if
I'll be
anyone
right
wants
back.
to do that, the best thing to do would be to bring in your phone and you say, I already have this phone.
Right.
Could you just...
Can I
they
put
might
a plan
understand.
on
Yeah,
this?
that would make sense. I'm not trying to knock the salespeople. It's just that's not the way it works right now.
Yeah.
And I hope that the Nexus One will start to change that.
Yeah.
I hope that we'll start seeing more phones that you can just buy unlocked. And I'd love to
just
buy
say,
a plan.
hey.
I'd love to not be locked in if I don't want to. I'd love to try Verizon for a month and see how the reception is at home.
Yeah.
I mean, how else can I do that?
Sprint, I know Sprint has something similar to that, but you have to get a Sprint phone, which is they do their 30-day money back, which we talked about, where they're saying we'll give you 30 days with the service, 30 days, and then we will literally refund every penny you paid to us, like no questions asked. If you hate the service,
Right.
If you're unhappy with it for any reason, we'll give you.
I'd love to hear stories from people if they've actually done that successfully.
As far as I've heard, it's like there's a couple people on like Consumerist. Like I think it was on Consumerist. I've heard a couple people say that it was pretty seamless. They just called and they went into the store and said, you know what, I just don't get service in my house. Like I think one person was talking about how they lived in mountains or hilly area or something like that, and she just said, I just didn't have very good service, and I wanted to try it, but I just, I took it back and I said, I just don't have service, and so they refunded everything. Which
that's really good to hear.
Yeah, no, which I would like to see all of the carriers do that, because I think that's fair. I mean, I don't want to get locked into a 2-year contract and then go home. Like I get great service at the Verizon store, and then I go home to my little podunk town out by Palm Springs, and it's like, well, what do you mean I don't have any service out here? Like, I got to take my phone. Well, sorry, you're locked in for 2 years.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, but Did you happen to notice in that article the Google saying that they're seeing Android itself is seeing 60,000 device activations a day?
I did see that. That was pretty amazing.
That's 60,000 a day. Like that's. I mean, I understand that across carriers we've got multiple devices and all sorts of different things, but
and that's worldwide too.
Yeah.
That's still great.
It's total per day. Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's so good. Like I'm excited about that.
Okay. So, what I'm excited about is the next article, where it says Flash 10.1 is coming to Android in the second half of 2010. So now we'd expected it sooner. They had basically, everyone sort of thought it was going to happen a little bit sooner. But Adobe didn't make their deadline for their beta at last year's Max conference. But they are promising by the second half of this year. Of course, absent from that announcement was Apple. No surprise there.
No love between the two.
Yeah, not at all. So the question I have is, so we talked a little bit, and I guess it was somebody in the chat room said, oh, it's an unfair question. Is it easier to develop on the iPhone or an Android device? Which is probably true. I mean, it depends on what language you're familiar with, or if you're equally familiar with both.
Right.
Once Flash appears on the Android device, and people can make Flash applications, I would posit to you that it is a lot easier, because there's an army of Flash developers out there. And
with Air,
they're not programmers,
coming out,
right?
Yeah.
Necessarily.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean,
well, that's true.
But you're right. There's
Yeah.
some people who create great Flash animations without necessarily a lot of programming. A lot of Flash is all programming.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
everything
true,
from scratch. It runs the whole gamut. But it's true. I mean, if you're already a Flash developer, if you already have, and Flash already has sort of an ecosystem of tools and community and all that. So yeah, if you already know Flash, you already have some cool things in Flash, you could port that to Android just like that, no question.
Right. And now, what do you?
Pretty good.
Now,
And with Air,
yeah.
Especially with Air coming out,
Yeah.
and having it be.
Well, the point is
multi-platform.
that suddenly there's a lot more. There's a much larger base of developers.
You've just all of a
Mature
sudden
base of
absorbed
developers.
a large amount of
Yes.
exactly. I mean, just by having it available
Yeah.
as a development platform, you're just opening the door to a whole bunch of people who've been doing Flash for years and years and years, as opposed to people who are just starting with Android like a year ago.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to my friend who has an iPhone, and his response was, I don't need Flash anyway. Like, you're in denial, man.
I just I
Flash.
I wonder about that, because I appreciate that HTML5 is. I will give credit where credit's due. HTML5 is great, but I see Flash everywhere on the internet, and so I can't imagine having I'm excited about having Flash. It's been hard to not have it on a phone, but once we have it, I'm gonna look at a phone without it as what is this? This is.
Well, you got to admit though, you still go to some sites and you discover that the site is built in Flash, and you cringe because you know that you're going to have to learn how to interact with their scroll bar,
right?
And and
That's
so
true.
now on the one hand, I really like the fact that I think that it's been a good thing that mobile devices have gotten so powerful they can browse the web, but they haven't had Flash because it's forced some websites to rethink whether they really should be building their entire website in Flash.
Right.
It means they're harder to search, they're harder to use on a small device, they're harder to use on a slow computer.
But something like YouTube that uses Flash, I mean, the site itself is not Flash, but
Right.
YouTube is completely inaccessible for the most part
If you don't
from the
have
iPad or
Or an
the
app.
iPhone. Yeah.
Well, that's why they created YouTube apps. That's a special case because video is I think a different case, and for video there are other methods. But for smaller video sites, there's no question you can't access those.
I think people will still realize if their site's unusable from a mobile device because it's written in Flash, like even if Flash is working, I think people will still realize they have to find something else.
But I agree, though. As a device owner, I mean, there have been times when I've wanted to do something from my phone, from my browser, that I wouldn't normally want to do on a small device, but that's all I've got. And like, I want to look up something on this website, and like, but there's Flash.
Like sometimes I need to
do.
feed my fishbill fish, and I can't do that from my cell phone, and then they get sick and die.
It's a problem.
That's a huge problem. It's huge. It's an epidemic.
It's a huge issue.
People can't feed their fishbill fish.
Flash,
Very
saving
sad.
lives.
Yeah.
Saving fish
Moving
lives.
right along.
I know exactly. Oh.
So Google is reportedly working on its own Android-based tablet to compete with the evil Jobs machine, which, yes, I did bring it with me.
Well, you never go anywhere
Behold
without
the
it now.
iPad. Yes, I know.
I don't have anything
So-
against the iPad. Like, I think it's a great...
Touch it. It's like
I
it'll
know,
burn.
it's so lovely. Like, I can feel the
Yeah.
power emanating from it. It's great. Like,
pretty great.
I use my friends all the time. Like, I like to mess around with it and stuff.
Which case is this?
I don't know. It's when Apple tries to upsell you.
Okay.
So
I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Obviously, they succeeded.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not touching that.
I know he hates it.
Just
he
like, I
might
don't
burst
wanna
into
touch it.
flames.
No, I
if
did play with one the other day.
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
skin's going to start
So let
boiling.
me get to the Android version of this. So basically, Eric Schmidt was at a party here in Los Angeles, and apparently he was I don't know, talking a little bit.
Yeah, I heard about this.
And it sort of slipped out. He was talking to friends, and he said that they're working on an Android-based tablet, and they're experimenting with it in stealth mode with a few publishers, basically for books and magazines and content. So pretty much what the iPad is, right? So
Which is pretty cool.
Which is
like
a
the Nexus
super
One
Kindle.
version of a
Yeah.
tablet. Like, it's kind of neat.
So basically, the question is this real? So basically, like a Nexus One of tablets. So
Yeah.
the question is this real? Do you guys think this is really happening? I mean, I guess you can't really comment, but
Well, I work at Google, but I don't work on Android, so
Yeah.
I don't really have any insight on this.
Yeah. I'd say it's definitely. It would be surprising to me if it wasn't real.
yeah, I agree.
It would shock me because they've already shown, like especially with this week, they've already shown that they can be profitable with
Yeah.
the Nexus One, and so I think in terms of that, obviously the next step would be to go forward and make a tablet.
The interesting thing for me was that they're using Android versus the Chrome OS.
I
Yeah,
agree.
that is interesting. I'm not sure why they're doing that. Do you
Probably
have
it's
any
just-
insight into that? Why they would do that?
Well, the only thing I can say is that Google's publicly said that you know they believe in both Android and Chrome OS, and that they think that they're different. They're both interesting approaches, and that they're going to move forward with both for the near future.
That's really
Perhaps with a tablet, it's more like because of the Android marketplace, things like apps. Like, I mean, I think that the bar has been set very high by Apple. I mean, it's not insurmountable, but they've done very well with what they have made.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of that's also an interesting point. Mike Full says Chrome OS equals full online. Android works offline too.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the interesting thing. Remember when Microsoft tried to do, they had their Windows product, and then when they moved down to Windows CE for mobile devices and sort of smaller devices, and it basically was a failure. I mean, when Windows CE was never really caught on the same way, the way Microsoft wanted it to. So maybe the idea of having, right tool for the right job, the way Google's going about it, is the right answer. And
Do
they
you
don't wanna
think that one of the people in our chat room said can't see why they won't merge them eventually? Do you think that would be something they would consider in a few
merging
years?
operating systems is not the easiest thing in the world. to
Maybe
do.
just
But in
ideas,
terms of
like
ideas.
things that people really love about Chrome, being integrated into Android. As if Android really takes off and people don't exactly accept Chrome as much, people really like Chrome, and I think that.
Well, that's the cool thing about having some sort of variance in what you're working on is you can pull ideas from one to the other, and they're both open source, so
Yeah.
it's going to happen.
So I think that both are Linux based. I think
Well, that's true. So
it's-
it may be easier to merge than I'm thinking.
Well, it depends on what you mean by merge. I mean, well, first of all, I mean Chrome OS. I mean the code is out there, but it hasn't really been released. I mean, there's no devices for sale running Chrome OS yet. So I think we have to kind of wait and see what happens once you actually see the real experience.
So I would assume that a Google tablet would run Flash,
Oh yeah,
especially when it comes out. Now, Steve Jobs, when he was talking about the iPad,
no, just no.
just hear me out. Yeah, he basically said no, but the reason why he said one of the things people love about the iPad is the battery life. the battery life is insane, and Jason was bringing this up all
very long.
on This Week in iPad
10
when
hours?
shows yesterday. Yeah, 10. I mean, it's 12. I've heard 12 and 13 hours, and I've experienced about that myself. So
That's
it's pretty
great.
impressive. Jobs said the reason why he didn't put Flash on Apple devices is because it'll chew the battery down, and it'll dramatically reduce the battery life. I would assume not just of Apple device. It's a flaw inherent in Flash. That's what he says.
Nah.
Well, let me ask
Is
you
this
this.
BS
Yeah.
or is this true?
Well,
to me.
I mean, I think if you want to take that argument, I don't think you should play movies either.
Sorry, microphone fell off.
Yeah, I mean,
make sure people can hear
I
you.
mean, why don't we just kill the Wi-Fi? I mean, that'll save a lot.
Yeah,
of battery
exactly.
life, too.
Here's my question. In terms of screens, that's running an LED screen.
Yeah.
When AMOLED comes out for tablets, why not? Is that going to substitute the battery life you're saving on the screen, then running Flash for the same amount of time?
Yeah, I think it's BS, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, I don't think that could be one reason, but I don't think that alone is a good enough reason. I mean, if users want to use up their battery by playing a movie or by playing a Flash game, and if it kills their battery, they should, people should have the choice to do that.
I can't imagine carrying around a tablet all day without some plug somewhere. Like, I've never, people always complain
can,
about
though.
battery
That's the
life.
thing.
Well, yeah, I know, and I think that's great. I can't, and for me as a user, I can't imagine being out for so long without access to a plug.
yeah.
That battery life is never a problem for me. Like, even when the Pre came out last year and everyone's like, oh my God, this battery dies in like 4 hours. It was terrible. I mean, the battery life was awful right at first. But then, I was just like, I don't have, I'm always next to a plug. I should have one installed, on my arm. I'm always near a plug. And
Do you use a car adapter?
Yeah.
Okay, because
I use a car adapter. I mean, I've got everything. I listen to Kevin Smith's Smodcast on the way down here every Friday. And, it's just plugged in and it's charged. Anytime I go somewhere, it's plugged into my car. And, I just can't imagine being in a position where I literally have unless I forget my cable.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being in a position where I'm like, oh
international
my God.
flights.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I guess international flight would probably be one. But then again,
much
I
it.
mean, if you had a laptop, you could charge it from there. Don't a lot of international flights have the volt adapters and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, it's
Business
true. I mean, a lot
class,
of people might not
usually
have them. I think that there are a lot of people where battery life is a concern for various reasons.
Yeah, and I think that's people, college
I
students.
mean,
walking
it costs.
around.
Yeah, I mean, it costs a lot of money if you want to get all the right adapters, and then you got to remember to take them with you.
true.
They take up space. I mean, for gadget freaks like us, I mean, we always have lots of extra power adapters. Also, I mean, if you always have the latest version of every gadget, and all your friends tend to have similar ones, you're like, hey, can I borrow your iPod charger? It's like, okay, can I borrow your, USB
true.
charger? I mean,
Okay.
there aren't that many you need, right? I mean, I know we do this all the time in the office, right? I mean, everyone's
borrow,
trading
yeah.
adapters, to
Right.
plug things in. But yeah, I think I know when I'm traveling, I think it is more of a problem.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to plow through a couple stories real quick
Okay.
here because I know we're starting to run short on time. HTC is also working on an Android tablet and 1080p video for smartphones.
Delicious.
Yes. So very nice. I don't think there's much to debate there, so let's move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
The HTC Hero is going to update to 2.1 at the end of April.
For Europe.
Oh, is that
And
only
then
in
we're
Europe?
getting it 2 weeks later in the beginning
Oh,
of May.
man.
I saw that. They said,
We're more
by
important
the
than Europe.
way,
We're America. What's up?
with the legend and the design, people are really wanting 2.1. And
Yeah.
so they're releasing 2.1 at the end of April for UK and Europe. And then
By the way, I'm just joking about
a week and a half
Americans.
later.
We're all important. So
we're all
make sure I don't get hate
unique
mail.
snowflakes.
Exactly. And related to that, Android 2.1 is now on more than a quarter of Android phones. So I thought we were kind of last in line. With that,
Yeah, I
with
guess we're
Android.
not.
I guess not.
All the phones that were launched with 2.1. I would.
Oh,
gotta
is that it?
include
Okay,
those
so it's
too.
not the updates. It's
Yeah.
okay. Got it.
Yeah. So, and actually, I think they were saying that now there's only 3 fragmentations. There's 1.5, 1.6, 2.1.
2.1.
Like
That sounds
201
good.
was
Sounds
they talk about 201, but that was just the interim update for the Droid before it went
Yeah.
to 2.1.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Google buys UK visual search startup Plink, apparently to help improve Google goggles.
They're expanding this.
Yeah.
Huge. Have you
So
seen
they see-
Plink?
I've not seen Blink.
Really cool.
What
You
is
take a picture of a work of art,
Yeah.
and it will process it, and it will tell you all about it.
So you just like take it. You could be in a museum. You could be at the Getty. You're like, what's this?
That's what I was talking about like 3
This
weeks
was
ago.
painted
I'm like, we should
by-
have QR codes next to paintings.
Well, it's like QR.
Blink took my idea.
It doesn't work by QR codes, so does it?
No, it's just you
it's
take a
visually
picture of the
recognized,
painting.
yeah.
Yeah. And it
Somebody
gives you
actually used my
information
phone
about it.
earlier. They wanted to use goggles because they were trying to figure out what a picture was on the internet.
That's
It
so
actually
cool.
worked. Yeah, I was
Wow,
shocked. I was
that's
like, it's not
interesting.
gonna work. He comes back. He's like, I'm buying a droid. Like, so it worked.
Wow,
Like, all
that's
right,
pretty
then.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
But they talk
Does
about
sometimes.
in that story. They take about they say what's going to happen with it, and they do a comparison to Google Voice because they bought Grand Central, and now Google Voice is huge. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this has a lot of potential, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so next story. Your next Android device may be powered by Intel. Ding, 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 ding. Intel
Yeah,
inside.
interesting stuff.
So I guess the love affair with Windows is over, or with Microsoft, or at least what has been for a while. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
so they're Intel basically sees that the world is going Android, at least in some fashion, and looks like they want to get out in the action. So
We'll see where that goes. We'll keep tabs on that, the Intel stuff. But I think that's interesting.
It's interesting they're headed that way. I guess it's just an announcement. Yeah, so they basically just announced that they've ported the Android mobile operating system to its smartphones on the Atom microprocessor, which is an Intel microprocessor.
Yep.
So, okay, Arcos readies Generation 8 of Android tablets. What's the deal here?
It's a
You still
whole
can't buy Android tablets. So how is it
Line
Generation 8?
of these
I was wondering about
tablets, and there's they go from 3 inches to 10. Like
Yeah,
and
how
it's all
about
the
just
same.
release one, dudes?
Yeah, like how
Dudes,
would we
I
just
just want
get
one.
one out?
I try to buy one every week, and I can't buy one.
There was a knockoff one in Asia. It was it looked like an iPad, but it was running like some weird, pirated. I can't say pirated version of Android, but it was like this weird modified version of Android.
Yeah.
It was really strange. So, I saw that and I just laughed.
Yeah, just please release
So,
one.
yeah,
Just
I'll buy one.
Anything.
Promise.
Yeah, he'll buy one. He's ready to shoot me with my iPad.
I totally messed up on this next story, the
Wow, so-
HTC device thing. I have the link, but I didn't put the story in there. That's my story from last time.
Yeah, I was like, what? That's all right. So, shall we move along to the next
Yeah,
one?
let's move on to the next one.
We can just fake it.
All right,
In a
so-
nutshell, you can go onto Facebook, and HTC wants you to help name their new device.
Right.
It's just a voting thing. They give you 4 names.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, that's not.
that's not
exciting.
vote. That's not. So you get to vote. You don't get to
You have
name.
to
it.
vote on the next name.
Oh, that's lame.
So
I want to name it.
maybe next time they'll do a
We have some good ideas
poll.
for names.
Yeah.
And then send it to Stephen Colbert.
Totally.
So
HTC Colbert. I would so buy that film.
You know, that would win. Like if Colbert got
It
up,
would totally win.
he would just
Stephen
say,
Colbert's my hero. He
Yeah,
got that
Colbert
bridge
would-
named after him, like treadmill and the space station. That's so
Nation,
great.
you want a Colbert.
Exactly, the
He would
HTC
absolutely do
Colbert.
All right, so I guess the last story, then we'll move along. Or do you want to talk about do you want to talk about the Bill Gurley?
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about this. So there was an article that I ran across today, sort of last minute, so we don't have a Chiron for it or anything.
Yeah.
But Bill Gurley tweeted this. So Bill Gurley is a famous venture capitalist, well known for being brilliant. And
I wish I was well known for being brilliant. Well known
we're
for
working
being
on that.
brilliant.
So, but Bill Gurley tweeted out when he tweets something, pretty much that means it's got heat, and it's hit the buzz meter is now
Yeah.
it's officially over the
Lighten
line.
up, yeah.
So there's this article about it says Android is evil, and
Or is it?
or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't had a chance to read this whole thing because it happened so fast right before we came in here. But I think
Yeah.
you did, right?
I got most of it. I was able to scan through it. It's really interesting. They talk about how Android might be the most closed system in the history of open source.
Right. So it almost sounded like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory about Android.
But they make some good points. It's not. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, I agree, but because I disagree to a large extent. But there's
Right.
some things that they talk about, like basically that the Android success has nothing to do with open source. That it's really owed to Apple, in part.
As a reaction. We've
as
made
a-
this point on the show like a bunch
Right.
of times. People get mad at us for bringing it up. so.
Network operators and carriers and Qualcomm. So for the chipsets.
They would have never united all the the disparate factions without
basically
Apple to
cheaper
hate.
alternative to the iPhone, like
Yeah.
Android, because it's open source, because they're not Google did not take their
Okay.
code and say only one phone, only one carrier.
But that doesn't mean that Android is evil.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what I was
it's-
gonna say.
But they do make some points later on where they say like Android, like Google owns the Android trademark, right? So
Right.
there's some ways in which
But that's true for anything in open source.
right.
that's true as well.
Firefox,
So
yeah.
I guess that's
Firefox,
kind of a
yeah,
non-issue.
exactly.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. I mean,
They make this paraphrase from Henry Ford's book on the Model T where they say anyone can have an Android in their own color as long as it's black. And like, so basically they're saying like you can use Android as long as
Okay, so the
we're
question is,
cool with
why
it.
is Bill Gurley?
source hardware?
Yeah,
Like it doesn't happen. So
but
well,
why
it
is
depends
Bill
on what you
Gurley
want it to
retweeting
do.
this?
I mean, that's part of that is the problem with trying to build like an actual
I was gonna
phone.
type that.
Let's say that you just wanted to build a tablet, kind of like the first version of the iPad. It just had Wi-Fi, and you want to build it on Android. Is there anything that would stop you from doing that? You don't need to call it Android in the name.
That's
You don't. It
true.
doesn't need to talk to a particular cell carrier. If it's just I mean,
An
so
existing
as far as I'm
device.
concerned, the system is open because you can do that, and I think people have built devices using Android.
yeah.
In fact,
And
some
there's
of
plenty of mods out there.
Yeah.
that are-
Yeah. Well, it's like that tablet I
Self-compiled.
was talking about. They took
Yeah.
Android and totally modified the code and then stuck it into a device that looks suspiciously like an iPad, and now they're selling that in Asia like for
Right.
really cheap. I think it was like $130. Like nothing. And they're just but you can do that. You just don't have to
well,
say,
the point is
"This
that
an
someone
Android
could do
device."
something similar in the U.S. and it could be perfectly legal. I mean, I think the point is like not building knockoffs, but you could create a really interesting product. You could power the whole thing with Android. So the Android operating system is open, but it's true that not everything in any particular phone is necessarily open.
Yeah.
They're both
Right.
true.
So here's some of the points that the author of this article, whose name is Andreas Constantinou, I hope I pronounced that somewhat correctly. Apologies.
Possibly.
There'll be a link on the site. So anyway, so basically one of the things he says is that the Android roadmap is private. The visibility offered into Android's roadmap is pathetic. So basically he's saying that the roadmap should be open. Everyone should be able to debate it and see it. People who make Android devices must sign an anti-fragmentation agreement, which I think is good. I'm always screaming
yeah,
about
see,
fragmentation.
yeah, I don't
so.
think
Well,
that
but
that just seems like a bad idea to not have something like that.
But what do you mean by a must? They must if they want to get certain things in return, not if they want to build a device. They can
Right.
go on their own, or if they want to be part of the community, if they want it to be Google branded, they have to agree to a lot more things than that. But
Right.
but they don't have to do any of those things.
Yeah, I guess none of this.
This
doesn't really-
screams evil to me.
Nothing. I mean, this is a
It's
closed
maybe
review process. The code reviewers all work for Google, so Google is the only authority which can accept or reject a code submission from the community. Again,
how an
you
open
have to
source
control the
project
fragment.
works.
Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
control the fragmentation somehow anyway. So
Yeah.
none of this really. I don't know. I'm not sure why.
I mean, I get why they're basically saying that it's the most closed open OS. Like, but
Yeah, but
but
if they
to some
didn't do
point,
that, they were this
it
be
would be
unusable.
chaos.
Yeah.
it would be anarchy, and that you cannot have that in the sense of especially a device.
Yeah.
Like if you're using it to develop, like you said, like a device that you're kind of using, you're making it, and it's powered by Android. That's fine, but when you're doing something that has updates, over-the-air updates that need to be fairly uniform. And especially with different carriers and different handsets, you have to have some kind of structure. And if that makes it the most closed OS, open source OS, then fine.
Here's I think what the real test is though. The real test is if Google turned evil tomorrow and I quit and but a bunch of current Android players or not current players, but a bunch of people who had access to the resources and the hardware and everything wanted to fork the system and keep building Android phones, but redo the parts that were not open. Could they do that? Yeah, they could.
Yeah, they could.
They could. They'd have to fill in a few gaps because they're not part of the Android system. They're things you need to make a phone work on various networks and for certain hardware pieces. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean,
And Google's trying to prevent that from happening, but at the same time, I mean, I think that's the whole key with open source. It's possible for someone to fork. Then you want to discourage people from ever doing that.
that's an interesting comment. It's, they have to control the platform as it is currently growing so fast. and that when the core system's complete, I think that it'll open up more. Like Mike Full on our.
I think that's true. I mean, once it's easier to make your own distribution or whatever, when we can eventually get to that point, then people will do it.
Yeah.
But until then, there's so much knowledge required to be able to do that successfully that it's not worth it for developers to try.
Yeah.
And I think, like we talked about last week, how they were saying, like, finally Android the fragmentation was going to start slowing down in terms of all their updates and everything. And I think as we start seeing it stabilize, it'll get better.
Google's realized it's a problem.
Yeah. It's definitely the wild, wild west right now in terms of, it's sort of getting better. We're sort of hitting the industrial revolution at this point. But it's like, definitely, it's just crazy. You can't monitor chaos.
Yeah.
So you have to have some kind of structure.